हो गया। ये लाइव। अभी तुम लोग बात मत करो, ठीक है? तुम लोग का आवाज आ रहा है।
स्टार्ट तो हो गया क्या हुआ चल ले टाइम लग
अरे बाबू सुन 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 सुन
नहीं चुप कैसे अजीब सा इसको बोलो हाथ रन लगा क्या आवाज आई थी देख कोई भी
Today is an important day for our institution because not only because we are visited by eminent guests and scholar and teacher of fields that are very diverse. It is also a day when we are trying to explore a subject which seems to be not directly connected to management. Because we do engage in disciplines of statistics and analytics and decision sciences, and often we forget that the assumptions that come to these streams actually come from mathematics. So as you can see that the title of today's lecture, uh, mathematics, discrimination in story of Radhanath Sikdar. Uh, mathematics is a very seemingly again difficult subject, and I am reminded of the famous statement which was posted at the Academy of Plato when he said that no person ignorant of geometry shall enter the academy. So geometry, at least to Plato, seemed very important. And if we look at mathematics as a subject, uh, broad branches that we think we know are arithmetic and geometry. Now, for Plato, geometry was important, but as we progressed, arithmetic became important. So, the names that we may be familiar with is Bertrand Russell, who is the famous mathematician, who gave more importance perhaps to numbers rather than to geometry. But I was thinking before I Professor Rosinka Chaudhuri for the lecture. I was thinking, how do we really understand mathematics? And perhaps the most basic units of our existence, space and time, I find some resonance in mathematics. And that is geometry perhaps engages with space, and time engages with arithmetic. So, what really is a number? How, and how do we sense importance of number in our lives? Because numbers are abstract entities and we can't really feel or touch or see numbers. So the easiest thing that come to us, uh, to which we understand number, is time. That we see it is moving forward, and then time is broken into chunks and so on. So time and space, and therefore uh, arithmetic and geometry. Now, if we extend this idea further, space becomes geography as we develop the discipline. So space becomes geography and time becomes history. So that is where I feel today's topic emerges, that it is about geography because colonialism and colonial India, so it is geography. And it is also history because colonialism is part of our heritage, our identity, so to say. And another interesting thing is when we combine geography and history and we bring human infallibilities to it, it also becomes, in some sense, politics. So, so this geography plus history is equal to politics is not a very elegant equation, but it is something that indicates towards the reality of our lives. So today what we are going to witness is a lecture where we can have a feast of disciplines. Disciplines not only mathematics but disciplines of politics, social sciences, sociology, psychology, culture, and so on. So a brief introduction to Dr. Rosinka Chaudhuri. Um, he is a visiting senior research fellow at various institutions across the world. Some of them are India Institute at the King's College, London. She is a Charles Wallace Fellow, Center of South Asian Studies at University of Cambridge, visiting fellow at Center of South Asian Studies, Columbia University. And then she teaches some very interesting courses. One couple of courses that caught my eye was one is cultures of coloniality and introduction to modern social thought. And another MPhil course she teaches is readings in philosophy, things, commodities, and consumptions. So these two courses she teaches, and I would really be privileged if she can consider delivering a few more lectures to our students sometime in future. Some of her work that caught my attention and that I would like to share with you, which I think is in some sense relevant to our students and the audience. Uh, the book, The Literary Thing, History, Poetry, and the Making of Modern Cultural Sphere. This is one of her books. Another interesting title, Freedom and Beefsteak, Colonial Calcutta Culture. This was written in 2012. Then another interesting area of work that she has published is around the works of the great poet Henry Derozio. So one work is Derozio, Poet of India, the definitive edition. In fact, I came to know that she has found several unpublished works of the poet, and they are included in her new book. She has also translated letters from a young poet by Rabindranath Tagore, and then a few other works that I would like to mention is one Modernity at Home, a genealogy of the Indian drawing room, and another work which was published in EPW, only what only what does not fit in can be true. So I repeat, only what does not fit in can be true. A few other poetic renditions, like the rustle of language, I found that very sensuous and interesting. And also the politics of naming Derozio into formative moments of literary and political discourse. And one on Michael Madhusudan Datta and the Marxist understanding of the real Renaissance, again published in UPW. So these are some of the most exciting works. I mean, of course, exciting to me. I am sure many will find many more works more exciting. But ma'am, we are very privileged to have you among us, and we are eagerly looking forward to your lecture on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Abhishek Kumar, for that very nice, eclectic introduction. Um, Really, I would not be standing here today without his initiative and perseverance. It was Professor Kumar who contacted us at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta, so that some of us could come and speak to you about our research. So thank you, Professor Kumar, and thank you all of you who are present here today for this lecture. I was thinking of some of the things that you said just to introduce this morning, and I was then taken to reflecting on what the story that I'm about to tell you, or actually stories I'm about to tell you about this man, Radhanath Sikdar, what it has to do with your work and your lives, your studies here at this wonderful new institute. And I was thinking, well, basically, first of all, Radhanath Sikdar's story highlights three things. And these three things I think are relevant not just to students of management, but to anybody and everybody in every walk of life. Because the first sort of link between management and Radhanath Sikdar is simply that his is a story of achievement. It's a story of incredible achievement. And surely that's what you are all here to learn as well, how to achieve. That was one. The other story that's going to come out from what I will be speaking to you about is his struggle against discrimination. There in the title, Discrimination. This was the colonial era, the British rule over India. There was colonial and racist discrimination. Discrimination continues in many forms, even in contemporary India. So, in a sense, this is a story of how one struggles against discrimination, what one does when faced with systematic and systemic discrimination. The other takeaway, maybe, and this is my last thought before going into sort of the paper itself, is that it teaches us to fight. His story, the story of Radhanath Sikdar, is a story of continuous fighting not in the battlefield, not as the army does when it defends our nation, no, but fighting for your principles, fighting for your morals, fighting for what you think needs to be upheld, the truth, fighting for each of these things at various points in his life. His life was one that was determined by the British occupation of India. Our lives are not, we are an independent India, but the fight for ethics, morality, truth is a fight that recurs in every age and at every time, whichever period of history we may be inhabiting. So I hope that some of the stories that I'll tell you today will resonate in that sense, at least, and be useful to you or at least interesting to you. So the first story I'll recount, this section is called The Great R. The first story I will recount is centered on the estimation of the credit due to Radhanath Sikdar, the most important member of the Trigonometrical Survey of India, to the celebrated efforts that led to the computation of the height of the highest mountain peak in the world, later named Mount Everest. Now, I'm assuming that you're all familiar with the Trigonometrical Survey of India. This is a colonial body of surveyors that was put in place in the 1830s to basically, for the first time, measure our subcontinent. These were the first men who actually physically measured it, because this is a time before computers, before the digital, obviously, before all of that. So this measuring of the land from the Himalayan peaks right down to Kanyakumari was done physically by teams of men with the equipment that they devised for the job, using geometry that you mentioned, using trigonometry, most importantly, to actually give us the first computations regarding the land mass that is the Indian subcontinent. So if you're ever on a trip towards Bangalore, I would ask you to look out for a tower that is still standing today of the Trigonometrical Survey of India. It has a small marble plaque on it, which actually mentions Radhanath Sikdar. They erected these towers everywhere in the country, but one of those towers erected in 1820 something is still standing on the road to Bangalore, on the main highway to Bangalore, and you will see this tower. And that tower was built sometime in the 1830s, I think. The exact date is given over there. To do exactly this, they went up on a height. They built these towers. They went up on that height, and from that height, they measured and surveyed the country. So, if you want to see one of these towers, then keep your eyes peeled on the road to Bangalore when you go towards the army cantonment. So, the difference of opinion regarding the role of Radhanath Sikdar in calculating the height of the mountain, then still known as Peak 15 at the Trigonometrical Survey, is divided along racial lines. Those who are informed of the matter, and it's surprising how few know of Sikdar, even within India, have made a hero of Radhanath Sikdar for being the man who first actually calculated and declared the height of this peak, while Englishmen, with a few exceptions, have consistently not acknowledged this, either at that time or later. believing the stories to be just that, fictional accounts by a few misguided patriotic Indians. Relatively recently, at the start of the 21st century, the subject was revisited in a book called The Great Arc. The Himalayan mountain range was referred to as the Great Arc by popular historian John Keane, who presented in that book, I'm quoting, a vivid description of one of the most ambitious scientific projects undertaken in the 19th century and the men who undertook the measurement of the Himalayas and the mapping of the Indian subcontinent, William Lambton and George Everest. A story unfolds of two intrepid Englishmen who came to India and generated knowledge of its conquered territory by mapping and surveying and computing it all at the Great Trigonometrical Survey. The book mentions Radhanath Sikdar only occasionally. He is introduced towards the end of the book as being, quote, the first Indian of rank in the employ of the Great Trigonometrical Survey and its undoubted mathematical star. George Everest's number crunching genius. He quotes Everest's praise of him in 1840. Everest described Sikdar as, I'm quoting, a hardy, energetic young man, ready to undergo any fatigue and acquire practical knowledge of all parts of his profession. There are few of my instruments that he cannot manage, and none of my computations of which he is not thoroughly the master. He can not only apply formulae, but investigate. Such praise, he acknowledges dryly, did not come easily to Everest, for accolades so fulsome would rarely spill spontaneously from Everest's pen, for whom giving credit to subordinates did not come naturally. Nonetheless, Key then goes on to robustly dismiss the notion that Sikdar, as chief computer, had played a pivotal role in computing the height of the world's tallest mountain. I'm quoting from Key. The popular account of the excited Bengali rushing to War's office, exclaiming that he had discovered the world's highest mountain, is obviously rubbish. As War's office was in Dehradun, while Sikdar was now in Calcutta. Everest had retired in 1843 and recommended that Andrew Waugh, who had joined the survey a year after Sikdar in 1832, was the best replacement for the position of Surveyor General. The great height of the Himalayan mountain peaks, combined with its unpredictable weather, meant that few useful sightings had been obtained at a time when it took many months for a team of humans to calculate, analyze, and extrapolate the trigonometry involved from the data measured in the field. According to accounts of the time, it was in 1852 that the team's leader, Chief Computer Radhanath Sikdar, came to Waugh to announce that what had been labeled as Peak 15 was the highest point in the region and most likely in the world. Sikdar and Waugh checked their calculations again and again in order to make no mistake in them. For about 10 years, they simply checked all their calculations again. And then they finally sent a message to the Royal Geographical Society where they stated that the Kanchenjunga was not, in fact, as peak of the world as had been thought till then. Returning to Key's narrative in the Great Arc, we see a single line on the subject. But, he concedes, it is quite probable that Sikdar's computations provided the first clear proof of 15's superiority. These are among the only lines in the book that mention Radhanath. But in all fairness, he is an Englishman writing about the heroic deeds of his own countrymen, Lambton and Everest, and the work they undertook in colonial India. Although the fact that this work, like all work done for the British Empire, was done in the service of empire and the subjugation of the subcontinent, is, of course, always missing from the story. It is our work as Indians, I will put it to you, especially as the students here, to write our own stories and highlight our own achievements. Something I think we still don't do as well as we should. As far back as in 1875, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee had complained famously in his essay Banglar Itihash, saying, সাহেবরা যদি পাখি মারিতে যান তাহারও ইতিহাস লিখিত হয় কিন্তু বাংলার ইতিহাস নাই গ্রিনল্যান্ডের ইতিহাস লিখিত হইয়াছে মাওরি জাতির ইতিহাসও আছে কিন্তু এদেশের ইতিহাস নাই In translation, when Englishmen go and kill a bird, they write a history of that too. but Bengalis had no history. Greenland's history has been written. Even the Maori race has a history, but our country has no history. Of course, since 1875, many histories have been written by us till now. But as we can see from Sikdar's story, there's always more work to be done in telling our stories even today. Now, he probably based his account of the discovery of the height of Mount Everest on the authority of a 20th century British officer, R.H. Phillimore, who compiled the historical records of the Survey of India in 1958. Phillimore took care to emphatically mention that, quote, contrary, however, to suggestions made, he, that is Sikdar, had nothing to do with the computations which determined the position and height of the highest mountain of the world, now known as Mount Everest. Official records clearly show that these computations were carried out at Dehradun after Radhanath's transfer to Calcutta in 1849 to hold charge of the computations there. Now, if anybody was to blame for what he calls the rubbish story, research into the subject shows that it was not excited Bengalis. In 1904, S. G. Burrard, then Surveyor General of India, had written an article in Nature, a very prestigious scientific magazine, titled Mount Everest, a Story of a Long Controversy. This article made public the controversy over the naming of the highest mountain. Now, I'm not sure whether all of you are familiar with the story about the naming, but Everest had always referred using local names for the peaks that were being computed by the survey. And it was Andrew Moore actually who named it after Everest, although Everest had retired from the survey long before this moment, and he played no part at all in its computation. So they basically, as a tribute to Everest's work, they simply decided to name the peak after somebody who had been their boss long before. Burrard also asserted that, quote, about 1852, the chief computer at Calcutta informed Sir Andrew Moore that a peak designated 15 had been found to be higher than any other hitherto measured in the world. This peak was discovered by the computers to have been observed from 6 different stations. On no occasion had the observer suspected that he was viewing through his telescope the highest point of the Earth. Popular accounts of the occasion must have existed among the officers and staff of the survey, however, for a dramatic rendition of this occurrence is subsequently to be found in an introduction written by Sir Francis Young Husband, the famous explorer of Tibet, then president of the Royal Geographical Society, to a book on Mount Everest written by a British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Howard Berry, in 1921. So, Lieutenant Colonel Berry wrote, quote, how it was eventually discovered to be the highest is a story worth recording. In the very year that Hooker was botanizing in the Sikkim Himalayas, the officers of the Great Trigonometrical Survey were making observations from the plains of India to the peaks. The observations were recorded, but the resulting height was not computed till 3 years later, that is, in 1852. And then one day, the Bengali chief computer rushed into the room of the Surveyor General, Sir Andrew Moore, breathlessly exclaiming, Sir, I have discovered the highest mountain in the world. The mean result of all the observations taken from the 6 stations from which peak 15 had been observed came to 29,002 feet. And this peak 15 is what is now known as Mount Everest. Now, this Bengali chief computer mentioned by young husband is, of course, Radhanath Sikdar, who had been appointed head of the computing office of the survey in Calcutta in 1849. How this worked was calculations from the team of surveyors in the field were first sent to Dehradun, and then, as a matter of course, to Sikdar at the Calcutta office, who was tasked with handling the data according to the methods of the survey and collating and finalizing the results before sending them back to War, who was the head guy, being the Surveyor General, at Dehradun. As Key disparagingly pointed out following Phillimore, Sikdar and War may not have been at the same place at the same time when the computations were being done, although conceivably either one may have been visiting the other at the time. If we wish to believe young husband's story. In any case, whether they were in close physical proximity at the time or not, since all of the field readings were examined and ordered and computed under Sikdar at the Calcutta office before being sent to War, who as Surveyor General was obviously the final authority, It seems fair to conclude that Sikdar was the fulcrum around which the final phase of the calculation was actually first resolved. That this stage was crucial was evidenced also by all records that mention the hopelessly confused data coming from the field. It is also recorded in the correspondence of the survey that Sikdar was responsible for working on the problem arising out of, quote, the error factor resultant from the atmospheric refraction, which he solved by a method he devised called the minimum squares method. So, more geometry. On July 10, 1851, Sikdar wrote to Moore on the subject of computational methods. The subject was there are two trilaterals made agreeably to the theorem of minimum squares. Two other letters are to be found in the archives, where he wrote to Moore on computation of heights and computation methods, following which, in culmination to a period of intense study, he wrote two long papers explaining at length, with equations, diagrams, and illustrations, the method of minimum squares. It seems fairly obvious then that the declaration of the exact height, what was eventually named Mount Everest, was evidently a team effort involving many mathematicians and scientists, but it certainly may not have happened when it did without Sikdar's central contribution to that effort. So George Everest himself, of course, had retired almost 20 years before the naming of the Phoenix honor in 1843 and had not been part of the final work on measuring and then calculating the height. Now, the denial and or elision of the contribution made by Sikdar to the trigonometrical survey of India was not confined to the calculation of the highest no. A long history of conflicted response to Sikdar on the part of British officialdom unfolds further down the road, including the elision of his name from central contributions he made to the meteorology department as head of the Calcutta Observatory, a post he was the first in on additional charge from 1852 onward. Here too, his contributions have not been acknowledged at all or attributed to the wrong person, despite evidence existing in the record. Colonel Colonial had written, for example, in the Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1852 of how, quote, an important service which later became the responsibility of the Indian Meteorological Department for ships using Calcutta port was also commenced by Radhanath in 1853. While meteorologist Anjana Chaudhuri has pointed out that the credit of hourly observations at the Calcutta Observatory was wrongly attributed to Henry Piddington in 1856, who in fact had nothing to do with it, as Sikdar had introduced the system in December 1852 as evidence from records available at the National Archive in Delhi. Now, denial of a legacy. The systematic denial of Radhanath's various official contributions culminated after his death in a huge controversy ignited in 1876 around what appeared to be a shameful and deliberate omission of his name by the British in relation to the publication of the third edition of a manual of surveying for India by the Survey Department. So this is the second story of this that I'm telling you. In the Bengali month of Ashwin 1291 BE, which is September-October 1884, a well-known Bengali periodical called the Arjo Darshan reminded its readers that it had been 14 years since Radhanath Sikdar had left this world at the untimely age of 53. So long after Sikdar has died. A man so admired by many of his compatriots for his excellence in mathematics, his physical strength, and independence of spirit, it will surely not have been thus forgotten, the article said. The writer of the article then points out that he was not alone in thinking along these lines. As 6 years after Sikdar died in 1870, one of Sikdar's English friends, Imraj Bondhu, had written in June 1876 to a newspaper called the Friend of India, with tears in his eyes and an aching heart, তাহার চোখে জল আসিয়াছিল ও হৃদয় কাঁদিয়াছিল, of the unjust neglect of such a man. The article then extracts and quotes this sentence from a letter written by Colonel MacDonald, formerly the Deputy Surveyor General at the survey. John MacDonald wrote, this is an excerpt from the letter that MacDonald wrote. We feel quite certain that we shall command the sympathy of every highly educated native in India for our determination to rescue the name of one of the greatest mathematicians, emphasized greatest mathematicians, which has adorned the honorable list of those who measured and computed the great Indian art from neglect by those who owe so much of its memory. Now, MacDonald had written to the pioneer and the friend of India to complain of the deliberate sidelining of Shikda's contributions to the trigonometrical survey by the British establishment. And he was not alone in taking the position he took with regard to Shikda. So, to point out to you also that when we think of the British and when we think of colonial rule, it is not an unfractured field. There are men within among the British themselves who are opposing the British establishment and officialdom to raise issues like this. A letter from a certain Lieutenant Colonel Sherville to the friend of India in 1876 had also said, quote, as an old revenue surveyor who used the manual for a quarter of a century and as an acquaintance of the late Radhanath Sikdar, I feel quite ashamed for those who have seen fit to exclude his name from the present edition, especially as the former editors so fully acknowledged the deep obligations under which they found themselves for Radhanath's assistance. The repercussions for this complaint, as far as MacDonald was concerned, however, were severe. For his pains, as the article said, for being a friend to the Bengali, he was reprimanded by Governor General Lord Lytton, suspended from departmental duty for 3 months, following which he was to join with a pay cut, demoted to second grade, and ordered never to be employed at headquarters again without special sanction. And the government order was reprinted in the article. So obviously, the British government of India did not take kindly to these matters being made public in the newspapers by its own men. So, what is this elision that they're all protesting about and commenting about in 1876? When the manual had first been published in 1851, Surveyor General Colonel Julia and Lieutenant Colonel R. Smith had written an acknowledgement to its preface, which said, and I'm quoting from the first edition of the survey, in parts 3 and 4, the compilers have been very largely assisted by Babu Radhanath Sikdar, the distinguished head of the computing department of the great trigonometrical survey of India, a gentleman whose intimate acquaintance with the rigorous forms and mode of procedure adopted on the great trigonometrical survey of India and great acquirements and knowledge of scientific subjects generally render his aid particularly valuable. The chapters 15 and 17 up to 21 inclusive and 26 of part 3 and the whole of part 5 are entirely his own. So there were whole chunks of the survey, of the manual of the trigonometrical survey that were written solely by Sikdar. And it would be difficult for the compilers to express with sufficient force the obligations they thus feel under to him, not only for the portion of the work which they desire thus particularly to acknowledge, but for the advice so generally afforded on all subjects connected with his own department. Unquote. Now, this is the first edition that appeared in 1851. The second edition of 1855 had carried this paragraph verbatim. But in 1875, the third edition, which appeared 5 years after Sikdar's death, discarded it entirely. It just dropped the full paragraph that acknowledged Sikdar, it just dropped it from the introduction to the manual. And it made no mention of his contribution to the publication in particular and to the survey in general. It kept the portions authored by him, but it neglected to mention his authorship. This is what occasioned the letter written in protest by Lieutenant Colonel John MacDonald to the friend of India in 1876 for what he termed this cowardly sin and robbery of the dead. He was not alone in his protests, and a storm of debate was generated in the papers called the Englishman, the Pioneer, the Statesman at the time. His superiors not taking kindly to such public outrage of governmental matters with regard to a government publication, MacDonald was, as we have seen, suspended and demoted. Now, Sikdar, a little bit about him. Who was this man? Radhanath Sikdar may have worked for the British government in India all his life, but he was certainly not a subservient servant of the British. Born into a Brahmin family in a locality named Sikdarpara after his family in Jorasham, They had once been important as keepers of the law, but by the time of his birth in 1830 were in humble circumstances. Most movingly, we have his testimony recording his own impoverished situation when he was a free student at the Hindu college. কলেজে এক পড়িতে পাইতাম একবার পড়ার কথা মনে পড়িত পরক্ষণেই মাটিতে ফিরিয়া যাইয়া কি খাইব মা বুঝি এখনো কিছুই খান না এই সকল ভাবনা মনে উদিত হইয়া পড়ার ব্যাঘাত in college I couldn't concentrate on my studies at one moment I would be thinking of my studies and at the next thinking of what I would eat once I returned home that mother had probably still not eaten anything at all. These are the thoughts that would rise in my mind and disturb my studies. Radhanath was a scholarship student at the Hindu College, which at this time, I must point out, was a school and an academy, not an undergraduate college, which it became later only in 1858 when it was renamed Presidency College. Joining in 1824 when he was 11 years old. Known as an exceptional student, he was proficient in Greek and Latin and later on in Sanskrit. He was fond of English literature. He remained a literary man all his life, translating poetry from classical sources and contributing regularly to the Mashik Potrika, the first journal for women published in India, that he founded with his friend Pyarichand in 1851. Passionate about the upliftment of women, he signed Vidyasagar's petition to legalize widow remarriage and was a member of the Bethel Society, which established a college for women's education in Bengal in 1851. The Calcutta papers named him as a boy, reciting a speech from the first scene of Thomas Holloway's Venice Preserved in 1828 and Orlando's speech from As You Like It in 1830 at the annual examination functions of the Hindu College were held at the town hall in Calcutta every year. At the 1831 function, his final year student, whose future lay in the physical sciences and mathematics, read an essay that he wrote himself, titled The Cultivation of the Sciences is not more favorable to individual happiness, nor more useful and honorable to a nation than that of polite literature. The same year, the Calcutta Journal Leanings in Science, run by a British person in Calcutta, published a paper by him to draw a tangent to two circles, so your geometry again, of which the paper said, a good deal having appeared in the public prints lately respecting the Hindu College, it may not be uninteresting to publish the accompanying solution of a geometrical problem by one of the pupils there, Radhanath Sikdar. The solution is altogether his own discovery and I have not altered a word in its composition. So he's publishing, so they are publishing a geometry problem that he's solving entirely on his own, that had not been solved before in the world. A member of the inner circle around Derosio, Henry Louis Vivian Derosio, was an Anglo-Portuguese teacher at the Hindu College, very important and well known, and also a poet. So Sikdar is a student of Derosio's, and he left a record of the moral and liberal principles inculcated in the Hindu College in his time. I was promoted to the fourth class in 1826 and began to take instruction at the Derosio. I was taught English composition, grammar, and books, among other things by Mr. Derosio was a very kind and indulgent teacher, and though often vain in his attainments, was nevertheless learned. He first taught us, the class that is, the object and end of knowledge. But since he's discussing with Michigan another day that the object and end of knowledge is something that we still need to learn, and we needed to learn it even then. So Derosio, Sikdar is saying, first taught us the object and end of knowledge, and information which cannot be too highly valued, and implanted that ambition of literary fame in my bosom, which I am glad to affirm directs and actuates all my efforts even to this day. He first directed my metaphysical studies and gave us those moral and liberal principles which I hope will ever influence my action. Cut off in the prime amidst innumerable projects for the reformation of India, his untimely death must ever be a matter of regret. And it may be swiftly affirmed also that he has been the cause and sole cause of that spirit of inquiry out of the truth and that contempt of vice which are so fashionable on the enlightened portion of the community and which cannot but be beneficial to India. So again and again, reinforcing the importance of knowledge, morals, and truth in any education. What Sikdar describes can indeed be seen in his own actions in response to a racist British dispensation time and time again. Finishing at the Hindu College in the year of Derosio's death, 1831. Derosio died a very untimely death at the age of 22 in 1831. He left a few months before he finished school, as he was recommended to the Surveyor General's office by his mathematics tutor, the well-known John Tytler, and appointed by Everest as a computer at an initial wage of 30 per month in the same year. George Everest has been quoted describing him as, so again, this is a different quote and it's from Everest again. So Everest describes him as a hardy, energetic young man who received an exceedingly good elementary education in mathematics at the Hindu College, which he has had the good sense considerably to extend. The habits he has acquired have made him hale, active, energetic, and enterprising. Radhanath Sikdar's usefulness to the survey may be gauged from the reaction of his application to the survey department for permission to apply for the post of deputy collector and so move out of the survey. He didn't want to work in the survey anymore. And this application, this request to move out of the survey, was necessitated by gross inequalities in pay and work conditions between the British who were employed by the survey and the Indians who were employed there. So, an application Sikdar made on behalf of the Indians to the authorities, having been denied, in fact, a number of Indians then left the survey, including Shivchandra Dev in 1838, when he left the survey to become the deputy collector at Baleshwar in Orissa. In the case of Sikdar, however, they didn't allow him to go. Everest was seriously alarmed at the prospect of losing him because, quote, he was become as it were my right arm in all matters connected with computation and registry of data, and the loss of his services at this critical moment would be one of the most severe privations that could be inflicted on him. This is a letter that Everest is writing with regard to Sikdar. He's just basically saying I cannot continue my work in this survey without Radhanath Sikdar's help, without his computations and data registry. This case went all the way to the board of directors of the East India Company in London. And in London, then, they framed a new rule forbidding natives who have been trained in the duties of an office, and more especially duties of a nature as that performed by Radhanath Sikdar, from applying to any other government department. So they simply, instead of allowing him to move out of the survey, they simply made a rule in London saying, okay, no Indian is going to be allowed to move from one department to another department, especially somewhere where technical knowledge of this sort is important. Denied this move, not allowed to leave the survey despite these inequalities, Radhanath Sikdar took premature retirement from the survey in 1862 when he was only 49. You see, this argument about the discrepancies was something he had been appealing about for a long time. There was a discrepancy in pay between the British and the Indian officials, and there were anomalies in the working conditions as well of the two races, which struck him as being grossly unfair. So, just to give an example, as chief computer, Radhanath Sikdar's salary was rupees 400 a month, which of course at that time was a huge and princely salary for Bengalis. But he earned rupees 400 per month, while the Surveyor General himself was drawing 3,250 rupees per month at the same time. So there was no comparison between salaries given to the British and salaries given to the Indians, although they may have been doing exactly the same work at the same time. So during his career, he wrote repeatedly to the British authorities for better work conditions for Indians and regular increments in salary, which he argued would incentivize them and produce better work. So his argument was give the Indians the same pay as the British, they'll work better for you, they'll produce better work. But to no avail. It was simply the racism of the British dispensation of the time, which would not allow officially themselves to acknowledge that an Indian can do the same work as an Englishman and get the same pay for it. They simply would not allow that. Although Everest described his work in 1838 saying that there are few in India where, whether European or native that can at all compete with him. Even in Europe, these mathematical attainments would rank very high. Nevertheless, as the historian David Arnold has pointed out, it is an acknowledged fact that despite genuinely appreciative remarks made by Europeans about individual workers such as Shikar, within the survey as a whole, Indians were strictly confined to subordinate posts. Widely acknowledged as a brilliant mathematician and scientist, with several papers to his credit, Sikdar was elected a member of the Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1853 and subsequently of the Society of Natural History of Bavaria at a time when this was an honor accorded to a select few Europeans. His prowess and achievements in his field were well known to his colleagues in the service 18 years, although official recognition appears to have been deliberately withheld. Such a state of affairs in an openly racist and hierarchical British government in India may also be traced partly, without a doubt, to an incident involving Cheetah that was reported on in papers generally, but especially in the Bengal Spectator. Now, the Bengal Spectator was a newspaper run by Indians, by Bengalis themselves, educated Indians from the Hindu college. Actually, Radhanath Sikdar's own friends. But because they ran their own paper, they were able to print this particular case in a great amount of detail in September 1843. And that is the story I'll tell you next, and which I'll. And it is a story actually of race and racism in colonial. Hierarchies of caste Indians were familiar with, and religious divisions in the subcontinent went back a few centuries. But racial discrimination was a new piece in India at this time in the beginning of the 19th century. And young Bengal remarked repeatedly, young Bengal was the name of the group that Radhanath Sikdar's friends formed. They remarked repeatedly on this new prejudice exhibited among the British in comparison to the Muslim presence before. The British seem to have enforced a socially effective racial prejudice at this time to a greater extent even than any other European nationality. So there were many, as you know, if you take a steamer down the Hooghly today, you will know that there were many sort of other countries that had established trading posts in Bengal. So down the Hooghly, you had the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Danes, and the French, who all preceded the English. But the British were the ones who enforced this race division the most stringently. Radhanath Sikdar, while in the employ of the Trigonometrical Survey, was involved in a dramatic incident that showed him insisting on a principle of equality being applied to all classes of Indians and being supported by the British at every turn. So, the Bengal Spectator wrote in September 1843. Our readers are probably aware Babu Radhanath Sikdar and Mr. H. Vansittart, superintendent of Dehradun, have appeared in a case. Now, on the 8th of June, Mr. H. Vansittart, superintendent of Dehradun, fined Babu Radhanath Sikdar and two other persons who were there with him, Messrs. Clarkson and Wheeler, all at the same place, in the sum of 200 respectively. So what had happened? Why did the magistrate of Dehradun, this Mr. Vansittart, file a case, or not file a case, actually just simply fine Radhanath Sikdar 200 rupees at this time? The paper gives us the particulars of the case. I'm quoting from the paper. A chaprasi, that is an orderly, of the police establishment, had on the 5th of May 1843 seized and detained with ill treatment and flogging 6 of the paharis, as men of the hill tribes commonly used by the survey were then known, in the employ of the survey and stationed under Sikdar. These men, paharis of police, were then compelled by the orderly to carry a load of goods to Rajpur. But as they did so, they happened to pass by the house of Radhanath. Upon seeing their own men being used in this way, he and the two Europeans asked them to come up and deposit the load they were carrying within their premises. The intention was, the paper reported, to send the goods at 10 o'clock the following morning to the magistrate's court so as to trace the owner of the goods and bring the offender to justice. So somebody has suddenly asked the coolies and the employee of the survey, who was stationed under Radhanath, to take their own personal belongings to Rajput. Now, as the paper is reporting, Sikdar had intended to simply confiscate the goods and next morning he would send the goods to the magistrate's office. But before any of this could happen, within 1 hour of seizing the goods, a man claiming to be one of the Judge Sahib's chaprasis came and demanded the restitution of goods, to which Babu Radhanath replied that we would restore them upon the production of a written parwana, that is a written warrant, from his master. Early next morning, a Jamadar, this is what a police constable was called at the time, made his appearance with the same request. Babu Radhanath repeated the answer he had given the chaprasis. Now, the reluctance to send along an official note of Parwana, it seems, was great, and it could be surmised that the reasons for this were the same as persist to this day, making written orders from government officers so difficult to obtain when requested, attributable perhaps to the reluctance of bureaucrats to be implicated by signing upon something that may later be produced as written evidence. The drama that then ensued is best reproduced in the language of the paper. At about 7 a.m., Mr. H. Vansittart and Lieutenant Patterson, accompanied by several natives without sending any intimation whatever, walked into Babu Radhanath's chamber. The following is the dialogue which took place between them and Babu Radhanath as reported by the latter. One of these gentlemen called out, "Who has detained my property?" I answered, "It has been detained by my own." He continued, "What business had you to detain my property?" I replied, "Just as much as you had in pressing and maltreating my people to convey your baggage, and I intend to take legal measures." He rejoined, "I certainly gave orders to my people to procure coolies, but not to press private servants, and I shall discharge the whole set of my barkandazes. Now, the matter might have ended there upon surmises had the Indian Sikdar with a little more understanding of racial proprieties and come to a reasonable agreement that the offender had not intended this to happen and that the punishment would be borne by the lowly Indian barkandazes, which is the term for footmen, who would immediately, of course, be sacked from their jobs. They would lose their livelihood. But the Indian in question was a little more pugnacious than could be tolerated in India, observing then that there is no regulation authorizing the forcible seizure and employment of anybody. The Bengal Spectator then reports, upon which gentleman in question in a loud and authoritative tone said, "Do you know who I am?" At which time the report continues by quoting Radhanath. The other gentleman, who had hitherto remained silent, sprang forward and questioned me. This is the other Englishman who has accompanied this person, who sprang forward and questioned me, "Who the devil are you?" I answered, "A man, and so are you." Radhanath Sikdar, by all reports, was by temperament a man who refused to back down in the face of racial hostility. All contemporary accounts confirm this with admiration bordering on disbelief, because you must remember that this is the time when the British ruled India. Rajnarayan Basu mentioned his mathematical skills and physical prowess in the same breath, writing that he could not tolerate tyranny or oppression at all, which is why he was hostile towards ill-intentioned Englishmen, often leading to fisticuffs. তিনি অত্যাচার সহ্য করিতে পারিতেন না। এ নিমিত্ত তুষ্ট স্বভাব ইংরাজদিগের সহিত তাহার বনিত না, সর্বদা তাহাদিগের সহিত তাহার মুষ্টিযুদ্ধ হইত। Radhanath's physical stature and courage was claimed as hereditary in part, belonging as he did to a family whose traditional role was to serve as commissioners of police in the Mughal era. The Arjo Darshan reported that their status as peacekeepers meant a minimal investment in education and a maximum knowledge of the martial arts. But as their power waned, so did their means. We've seen how Radhanath Sikdar was very poor at the time when he was in the Hindu college. Under the laws instituted by the colonial government, that government was expected to be impartial in the delivery of justice. This then was the larger fiction under which imperial rule functioned, and this was the standard Sikdar expected the courts to maintain in his case. In small individual cases such as his, however, the forms of legal propriety were routinely discarded in favor of racial solidarity. Democratic civility at home did not mean that Indians need to be treated as equal to the British in India in most cases. Nonetheless, the larger principle was one that Sikdar understood to be the important one and took it at its word. As this was a principle he was willing to fight for. It equality under the law. It is to be noted that Sikdar used language that evoked the universal applicability of the law. There is no regulation authorizing the forcible seizure and employment of any body. There is now a description of how the case unfolded. I am running out of time, so I will not give you a blow-by-blow description of what happened. What happened was unfair, racist, and a fight ensued. I mentioned how we need to keep on fighting, and Radhanath Sikdar was a man who continued to fight. Between this man, so the man whose luggage Radhanath Sikdar had confiscated, the man who stood into the house and demanded, the release of his goods, turned out actually to be the magistrate of Dehradun itself. This is the main person in Dehradun, the magistrate of Dehradun, which Sikdar didn't know when he had confiscated the luggage. Nevertheless, Sikdar is insisting on the law. He's saying that you cannot use the police, you cannot power, we believe in equality under the law. Well, in the case, as this case showed, there was no equality under the law. It was there in principle, but in individual cases like Radhanath Sikdar's, the Indian inevitably lost. So Radhanath Sikdar is then, he goes to the court. This, actually, the court he needs to go to is Vansittara's own court, because he is the magistrate and he's the one who calls. Then what he does is very mean-spirited, because he goes off to a cantonment 20 miles from Dehradun, and he calls Radhanath to that particular cantonment. Radhanath travels over hill and dale and reaches, finally, that camp to find that Vansittara is decamped from there and gone to a further distance away. Anyway, a cat and mouse game then ensues, and Radhanath finally reaches the court. Now, this man is himself the man who is being accused. And he himself is the man who is judging the case. And he judges his own case and he says, I fine Radhanath Sikdar and the two other people 200 rupees for insolence. So this is then taken by Sikdar. He will not give up. He fights till the last. He takes it to the higher court. Where can he take it from? Dehradun. He then takes it to the higher court, which is the court in Allahabad. So this is because this is duty. He's taking it to the high court in Allahabad. The Allahabad court is critical, criticizes the magistrate. He says, return that 200 rupees to them because this is. But he does not take any action against Vansittara. So the papers are observing, Bengal Spectator run by Indians is observing. The British won't take any action against their own people. This is the problem. They are saying that we are all equal under the law, but we as Indians are not getting justice in the same way. So this is the larger story of the case that then the rest of my chapter continues to tell. And that is the case that Radhanath Sikdar fought and lost at that time in British India. But the important moral of the story, the reason why I include it among the various stories that I've told you with regard to the, Sikdar's own career and the trigonometrical survey, his computation of the height of Mount Everest, all these stories are basically stories of a fight against racial discrimination, a fight against colonial authorities who are being unjust. Again and again, it is a fight that he fought a very long time ago in the 1840s, in 1843 to be exact. The case was fought in 1843. This work at the survey was from 1843 to 1842. It is a very long time ago. We are now in 2023, but I would put it to you that these are fights that continue. They continue every time that any one of us, any one of you, stands up to make a case for morality, for ethics, for the truth, against a perceived injustice that you may happen to witness or that you may experience in your own life, that you wish to take a stand against. So that basically is the story of part of the story of Radhanath Sikdar, and I hope that hearing about him has made some impression on you and will help you in your careers and in your own lives in the future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that would have a freedom of Radhanath Sikdar A.
Very nice. I wasn't the one who made the poster. If you had asked me, I would have certainly sent a picture to Shita. It is a beautiful because by the time he died in 1850, he died in 1870. Sorry, there is a picture of Radhanath Sikdar that is very rare photographs in those days. But I'm not sure whether it's a photograph or an artist's impression. But there is a it is a photograph. Oh, you looked it up. Yes. So it is there. It could have been on the poster. That would have been nice.
We, as you said, we and we are safe plus we we say that the code of law was the British or United Nations being highlighted that this has changed, which has been the past, and there is a kind of a revolution from there. It has an acknowledgement that it's being made and should be helped.
It's a very interesting question. I, in fact, told this story. Uh, I was invited to give a keynote lecture at King's College in London just last September. So in September 2022, they invited me to speak about, and I said, "You are the Law Society. I'm not a lawyer. I mean, I don't, do sort of law. So why are you asking me to speak?" But they insisted, and then after some thought, I thought, well, so I didn't tell them this story of the great arc. I told them the latter story of the case. I told them, and I told it to them in great detail. I told them the story of this case and how it was fought by Shikdar and how they denied him justice in the British Empire, and that the British Empire uniformly, at this time especially, of course, by the time Gandhi is a lawyer and Gandhi, the cases have been fought in the 20th century, things have improved. Many Indians by that time are barristers and qualified in the law, and things are slightly better. We are moving towards independence in the early part of the 20th century. But this is 1843, and throughout the 19th century, basically the British Empire did not work under their own principles of equality under the law. So that is a story that at least I have told them. I don't know what lesson they took away from it, but I did. I was invited to give this lecture to the Law Society at King's College just last September, and I told them this story. There is no question of their returning anything or acknowledging anything. My feeling is, as you know, there is no sort of nothing has been acknowledged about returning the Kohinoor. Certainly, you mentioned it at the start of your question. So you can understand how difficult it is. But it is our work as historians to continue to insist, to continue to tell our story, and to continue to insist. And the historiography will change. It does change. It has already changed. There is widespread acknowledgement of history. No historian of British India will sort of disprove or try to counter this story. There's no question of that. Certainly, so historiography and the ways of telling history have changed. You're asking me a question about them, about whether they have. So I think it has changed, but in relation to their own curriculum, their own practices, I think it needs to change further because this is as again and again I'm saying to you, these are battles that need to be fought continuously. So this argument, again, I was involved in something when I was at Oxford as Mellon Professor of the Global South in 2017-18. I witnessed professor at I'm sure he's a professor at Oxford, but certainly he was holding a conference in Oxford that basically was arguing for the good that the British Empire did in India, to which I then wrote a letter to the Oxford Gazette saying that you need to acknowledge first the injustice you did to India. At least you need to acknowledge the injustices side by side with whatever good you seem to have imagined the British did in India. Maybe they did, but if you think they did, you need to start by first acknowledging the injustice. So I was surprised that so when was I professor at Oxford? 17 to 18. I was surprised that in 2017 I was having to make this argument that had been won already, I thought, following independence and in the 20th century. But these things, we regress. As a world, we regress in our political views. And when we find ourselves facing, a story that is being told wrongly, we need to then tell the story according to our own information. And we need to do it again and again. So I think the British certainly can do more to acknowledge the injustice of their empire in various parts of the world. They're doing it now, but they need to do more in relation to their curriculum. As far as I know, they don't teach the British Empire in the schools. I'm not sure, I'm maybe wrong about that, but I've been told that British school children don't learn about the British Empire in India. So, and what happened in Satyavamata. So I think they need to know. That is not my fight, that is their fight, but as an observer, I think they need to.
Ma'am, is this trigonometrical survey of India the one which came to the Surveyor General's office? Same thing.
Same.
In which year was it done?
When did it change from the trigonometrical survey to? I don't have that exact date. I'm sorry. I'm sure it will.
Later part of.
Yes, it will be much later. The office is there on Chaudhuri.
Yes.
It's a beautiful building.
Yes. Secondly is that however changing the name of Mount Everest to Mount Radhanath.
Well, that's a first. I've not heard that.
It must be done because if we stand by whatever we say, then we must fight for this way as well.
That's an excellent suggestion. Why not? Yes, absolutely. So it should be called Mount Radhanath. There was a Nepali name for it. It was a rather long and complicated Nepali name.
Yes.
And they were afraid that nobody in the rest of the world would be able to pronounce it. Otherwise, Everest himself actually had asked that all peaks be given their local names wherever they were. So Karakoram, Kanchenjunga, but this one, Peak 15, had a very long, there was a long Nepali word for it, which they thought would not be pronounced easily. And since they were ruling India at the time, they just went ahead, named it Mount Everest.
Right. Even the Chinese have a different name too.
They do. They don't call it Mount Everest.
No.
So that is very interesting. So thank you.
Yeah. And ma'am, I have just one rejoin that. You must be knowing that only a few months back, the Cambridge University returned one of the artifacts taken from one of the countries of Africa. They made a small function. They asked the ambassador of that country stationed in England to come and return it.
One of the Benin bronzes. Yes. It was a bronze statue, a Benin bronze statue. They returned it. Yes.
Also, but there was another piece, porcelain piece. And I have the photograph in the National Geographic magazine that the returning.
No, there has been some acknowledgement. There is a very strong movement, as you know, for decolonizing the syllabus. There is a movement called Rhodes Must Fall, which is basically arguing that the curriculum in Britain and needs to acknowledge empire and the injustice of the empire, and the syllabus needs to reflect that more. So students themselves are arguing this, and there are a number of students. And Cambridge, in fact, has been very progressive and forward-minded in returning those artifacts. Oxford has not. My own college, Oriel College, Oxford, has that statue of Rhodes that the students were demanding should be brought down, and that statue of Rhodes has still not been brought down. It's still there because the college authorities have been unable to convince their own funders, to accept that the statue needs to be brought down. Because there's a whole counter argument from conservatives in Britain that say that we need to accept history as it is, how many statues we bring down, and just acknowledge that the history was bad, the statue has to remain. So that is something that they need to fight. That is their battle, and they are fighting.
Yes.
But Cambridge has done something that Oxford has not done as yet. So it's a battle that remains. There are more battles
Yes.
that
Now all the countries of Africa are returning their.
they're being returned to Africa. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm audible. Yes. My name is Rosinka. I'm just wondering that since those are the real history of India, and now there is anything being implemented, and whether there is some recommendation from the bodies like different kinds of letters to the government to improve that system so that our children and next generation learn the actual history of our country. So that any recommendation is from your end, your body there.
Well, the NEP, as you know, after it was drafted, it invited comments, recommendations from the larger body of academics all over India. This specifically is not a recommendation that we sent to the NEP, but a number of my colleagues were in fact authors of the NCERT textbooks that in fact are now in the middle of some controversy because passages and pages and portions of it are being withdrawn. And so from time to time you'll see that in the papers. But those NCERT textbooks were written by some of my colleagues at the center, and those are excellent textbooks. And there, in fact, they try to tell some of this story. But what individual states will do with history textbooks, what they will allow to be taught and not to be taught, as you know, is a complicated political matter. So there is, even if, and I would still, I take your point, and I think that historians should make recommendations and should be proactive in this matter. But in the end, as you know, in our country, sometimes it is politics that wins. So I'm not sure whether that applicability will happen. But you're right in that certainly we should put it forward at least to the government to say that let these stories be included in the history. That's very important. Whether they will be, I think, is individually up to different bodies that take this.
Wonderful lecture here.
Yes.
Wonderful lecture, Rosinka, and I was very interested in the relationship between mathematics and discrimination. Because generally what the assumption about mathematics is absolute that there's no this not discrimination. There can't be any factual mistake or mind in a formula or in an equation. Something in that relationship, discrimination is coming in. And I just want to speak a little more on that relationship. That's what, yeah, because there's so many things that is, but the fact that mathematics is an science, there's nothing beyond mathematics on the computer or it could be a even there is discrimination is taking in Colonial. Yes,
Certainly. As you know very well, the story of discrimination in relation to science, you're quite right that science is taken to be a universal language. In science or in mathematics, 2 plus 2 makes 4. Nobody can argue that fact. So, physical sciences, especially in physics, chemistry, biology, you are supposed to take as these are supposed to be axioms, and they are supposed to be universal axioms that need to be acknowledged everywhere. As you know better than me, I'm sure, basically that is not how it functions in the real world, of course. Discrimination in acknowledging scientific work has been the lot of Bengalis since the time of Jagadish Chandra Bose. in the time of Shruti Ghosh, in the time of these are people who basically again made the most important scientific contributions at that time. As you know, Jagadish Chandra Bose did not want his findings to be commercialized. Marconi had no such inhibitions. So he is now acknowledged as the founder of the radio, when the radio wave was definitely and proven to have been demonstrated by Jagadish Chandra Bose before Marconi. So this is a story that again our students should know, but that there is no discrimination in the field of science is of course a story that has been proven wrong again and again and again, because science, and especially because of the important bodies, works, journals, and work happening in the West, is considered the prerogative of the West, and trying to sort of equal that or counter that or even make a contribution from this part of the world is often suspect and the subject of discrimination. And it has been from the time of Jagadish. No, there is another word in Nepal.
So the Gondwana is a fraction of the Gondwana land lighted. So that is why in the
Yes.
the Sagar Mata is forming from the Sagar and that.
Beautiful. Yes.
It's quite clear scientific. Yes. My other question is, there's a somewhere I think that some sort of oral transmission of knowledge was continuing. So our scientists, scholars, essentially express their very English to express their knowledge. They managed to convince the Western world also that they had much higher certificates. That is how mentioned the brothers actually speaking before so I think interesting. Not some sort of over translation of knowledge. Absolutely. Are the individuals which we are discussing.
Thank you so much. So I agree with you completely. I was actually in the just last month, in fact, in July, I was working in Oxford at the Colonial library on a very early system of schooling. Because I was looking at the foundation of the Hindu College. In 1816, when the Hindu College was founded, at the initiative of Indians with Indian money, they actually founded it British, against the British the wishes of the British authorities, you know, because at that time they didn't want such a college to be established for Indians. So Indians fought for it. So looking into the foundation of the Hindu College in 1816, I suddenly realized that this is in fact then one of the first such colleges anywhere in the world, because University College London is founded only in 1828. University of Virginia is the one founded by Thomas Jefferson, but that is also 1819. What do I mean? This type of college, a college that will have no religion. There will be no religious texts taught. There will be separation of church and state. This was a movement for secular education that they fought in England long after the Hindu College was founded here in 1816. And looking into that, I then began to look at school systems, because I went into a text by Bentham called Prestolithia, where he's recommending, and there I saw that he's recommending something madras system. Now, this is not my area, so history of education, so I thought, what is the madras system? I went to the book written by the gentleman who was in Madras called Bell, who basically devised something called the Madras system. And I thought, this is what he's advocating. Two things comprise the Madras system. One is learning, when you're in primary school, learning how to write alphabets on the sand with your finger. And the other is a monitoring system of teaching where the older children teach the younger children. They didn't have this in that time. This Madras system is devised by, I don't he must have seen them writing on the sand in Madras. He could not have invented a board with sand on it for children to learn writing with their fingers without having been in Madras. And sure enough, by the time I reached page 251 of his book, there suddenly he's saying, while on the Malabar coast, I visited a traditional school where I saw children learning how to write alphabets with their fingers on the sand. Monitoring system also, I would not be surprised if it came from our Pathshalas. But when he's writing his book, it is as if it is his own genius, where he is advocating this new system of education. This system that he's advocating as the Madras system in 1787 is being spoken of by Bentham in his book Crestomathia in 1804 or 5. This is then becoming the norm for schools in Britain called Lancasterian schools. This system of monitoring education is something they are taking. But there's no acknowledgement that it's come from India, that it's come from Madras system. It's there if you look very hard in the research, but they won't acknowledge it. Then it becomes something that we British have started this new form of, and it was a very successful form of education because their system of education had been canes and whips and punishing children. And this gentleman is actually writing that this encouragement and allowing a older child to tutor a smaller child works better. They learn more than flogging them or caning them, or which was the system in England. They took this from India, but they did not, apart from calling it the Madras system, which thankfully then led me to find the trace of it. And where did they get this Madras system? At least they called it the Madras system. Sometimes they wrote it. So they took a but not only the very bronzes or actual artifacts, but systems of learning such as this. And Ramanujan quite helpfully, as you're pointing out, of course, was part of that tradition. And part of his computations and his work done on chalk on the floor was part of his own original systems of thought. And that's still not acknowledged properly as viable means of transmitting knowledge. So yes, I think your point is very interesting.